Hello and welcome back. I am excited to share with you today some of, I think, the more useful or interesting personality test measures. Now that we've learned about the theories of personality and the different models. And I also think it might help you understand some of these measures better. For example, the Big Five, if you actually get a chance to apply it to yourself. So I hope you find this also helpful for your understanding. In your textbook reading on personality, they shared that the most researched empirical theory, well, it's not really a theory, it's a model of personality, is the 5-factor model. And the 5 factors of personality are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, these are not single traits. Okay, so neuroticism isn't one thing. Neuroticism is a factor. It's a label that we put on a group of traits that we say are clustering together, that tend to be correlated in people. But they might not be correlated in you, okay? If you have let's say, a neuroticism score that puts you like in the middle of the distribution, well, maybe you could be really high on some of these traits, like anxiety or anger or depression, but you might be really low on these other ones. Okay, like self-consciousness, impulsiveness, or vulnerability. Just because they're correlated on average doesn't mean that they're correlated for you. So when you take the 5-factor personality test, it'll give you your scores for the major factors. But the version of the test that I sent you doesn't show you sub-factors. It was kind of challenging for me to quickly find a free version of the test. These are the sub-facets of the different factors. So, and these sub-facets change. Things get shuffled around in the 6-factor model of personality, the HEXACO, which is actually a better model. It's more predictive. It has something called incremental validity over the 5-factor model, right? It predicts outcomes better. And some things get shuffled to different factors in the 6-factor model. So in the 5-factor model, anger falls under neuroticism, but in the 6-factor model, it's going to move over to agreeableness. Anger is low agreeableness. And that's important because, as I'll explain, one way to think about agreeableness or disagreeableness is as dominance or submission. Yet the 5-factor model would put dominance on extroversion as assertiveness. And so your textbook talks about, I think, like love and dominance as extroversion and agreeableness. Actually, the 6-factor model would load all of that onto agreeableness. One thing that I think is interesting about these personality models is that they offer a different lens. So let's say that somebody has an anxiety disorder. One way you could see that is as mental illness. Somebody could have an anxiety disorder. They might have major depression, dysthymia. Another way you could look at it is, there are personality differences between people, and some people might have a more sort of depressed personality, right? Somebody might have a more anxious personality, and we'd expect that from situation for situation, they act in more anxious ways. Any questions about the 5-factor model? Well, your scores on this model represent relative values. In this highly stylized profile of somebody's 5-factor scores, we'd see that they have relatively high extroversion to other people. It's not about an absolute value of extroversion. It just means above average. And there's a reference for that average. Like these tests were normed on people, probably mostly white undergraduate students. So it's a comparison to the reference group that the test was normed on. And this person here would have relatively low conscientiousness. And looking at this, I would expect to see this person maybe being less orderly than average, a bit more disorganized, right? A bit less self-disciplined, maybe more impulsive. Now, I sent you a link to the Star Wars personality test. And this is basically a free online Big Five test. And the researchers who put this out want to get a lot of data, right? They want to see what people's scores are like they want a really big sample of people. And how are they going to get you to take the test? They're not paying you to do it. Do you really want to go and take some psychological test? Well, they try to draw you in with this Star Wars thing. And so they're representing openness as Yoda and conscientiousness as Admiral Akbar. And you can just ignore that stuff. Okay, maybe it's fun, maybe it's interesting, but you can disregard that and think of these as the 5 factors. You can see them down here. And these are my scores from when I did the test, and it's showing me as sort of above average. I'd say 84th percentile. What that means is more extroverted than 84% of people who have taken the test. Right, more extroverted than 84% of the people this test was normed on. That's what that means. You can sort of interpret this, and it suggests that I'm pretty extroverted relative to others, pretty conscientious. Oh, sorry, that was openness. I was reading that as extroversion. This one's extroversion. Extroverted, open, relative to others, and damn, pretty disagreeable, 3rd percentile. I find it easy to be critical. I'm very into critical thinking. And here's something that interesting, and this changes. This is illustrative of a big difference between the Big Five and the HEXACO. Here it's interpreting disagreeableness as actually kind of being malicious, an evil, power-hungry tyrant, manipulative, evil, and ruthless. Let's jump back to the 5-factor. So what they have under the agreeableness is trust, straightforwardness, altruism, that's helping others, as you know, compliance, modesty, and tender-mindedness. And so disagreeableness, low agreeableness would be the opposite of these things. It would be being kind of suspicious, like that's being critical. You suspect that narrative. They put straightforwardness and honesty here on agreeableness. The HEXACO is going to pull that out and put it under honesty, humility, which they separate out from agreeableness. And altruism, I believe, also goes on. I think that might also go on to honesty, humility. Compliance, modesty, tender-mindedness. One way to think of this is that this might be getting at dominance and submission, because more submissive people need to be trusting of authority figures. You would want them to be straightforward and honest toward the authority figure, not undermining. More compliant, and of course, modest, not like challenging the authority. And tender-mindedness means kind of forgiving and accepting. However, what the HEXACO is going to do is pull out some of those ethical things about like honesty, or whether you're being self-interested or manipulative, harming others, and put that under honesty, humility, so that you could be both disagreeable and honest and humble, and you could be agreeable and narcissistic. These models come with their value judgments. So this is shot from a textbook, an intro psych textbook, not yours, another one I teach from. And there's this strong sense that it's good to be one of these high on this and low on that. Like, consider openness. It sort of sounds better to be imaginative and independent, and maybe it sounds a little bit worse almost to me to be sort of practical and conforming. But in reality, there's, it takes all kinds to make a world, and we need practical people. Like, not everyone can be at the art gallery and the opera all the time. Is there anything wrong with preferring routine? This kind of sounds like a I don't know, but boring person. It almost, to me, sounds a bit like class privilege, right? Maybe if you're lower in class privilege, you have to be practical. Maybe you have to conform more versus spending your time at the art gallery. I keep saying art gallery because I know that one of the questions on the test is about whether or not you like to go to sort of museums and art galleries. But you really see the value judgments coming through and the kind of really loaded terms they use. So low conscientiousness is disorganized, careless, and impulsive. And high conscientiousness is organized, careful, and disciplined. And it sounds like you should be this and not that. Now, I have a sort of challenge for you. Could you use a strengths-based perspective on low conscientiousness? So they're calling it disorganized, careless, and impulsive. I'm going to jump back so that you can see these subfactors: competence, order, dutifulness, achievement, striving, self-discipline, and deliberation. They all sound wonderful. Can you think of any ways that being low in these traits could actually be beneficial? People with ADHD would be described as low in these traits. Yeah, Lillian's got one. And when you say being openness, that sounds a little bit like the openness subfactor, which is a different subfactor. But I think what you might mean is flexibility, fluidity, flow, being able to turn on a dime, being spontaneous. So, and Liam says, I have ADHD, and you're definitely not good at most of those things. So maybe you have low conscientiousness, but do you have any like superpowers from that too? And I think that that Lillian had a few there. Grace, I'm looking at your comment. More free-spirited, unique, confident, and adventure. Make sure you're not mixing it up with openness, though, because some of those things like adventurousness load under the openness, and these are supposed to be off the, like, different factors. Now, in the MBTI, they characterize something that seems very similar to this dimension as judging versus perceiving, and the perceiving type is that more like fluid, flexible, spontaneous kind of a type. Liam says, hi, throughout elementary school on your learner profile, it said, questions why work must be done. That is funny. And, that could reflect low conscientiousness, like maybe you're not being dutiful. It could also be picking up on agreeableness because it's a bit suspicious. It's like, hey, what's this about? Explain that to me. And Lillian says, are they really different factors or do they overlap more than we think? Yeah, actually, they overlap more than you think. Often when we present these things in psychology, we present it as way more clear-cut than it actually is. All right. So I want you to know about the Big Five because it's just so used. It's the one that you'll see in most personality research, so you should know about it. The HEXACO is much less known. I think it only got like a line in your textbook. But if I were going to be doing a research study and I was testing personality, I would not use the Big Five. I would definitely use the HEXACO because it has better, it's more valid. And it also does a better job of covering these kind of dark sides of personality. There's a dark triad of personality factors like narcissism and Machiavellianism, psychopathy. And this test would actually pick up on that, not as low agreeableness, but rather as low honesty, humility. You could think of honesty, humility scale as getting really at like self-interest, the nasty things you'd be willing to do for it, and wanting to be better than other people and have more wealth versus being, I guess, more modest. And I'm reading in the chat, Liam said the teacher would say, do this thing. And I would say, why? And the teacher would say, because I said so. Your teacher has an authoritarian style. And the teacher, and then you'd say, why do you say so? Being disagreeable. And the teacher would say, just do the work. Again, authoritarianism. And then I would say, why? And then after an hour, the teacher would call my parents and send me home. Well, I'm glad you made it through high school and you're here now. Okay, so the key differences are around how we're sorting out this additional factor of honesty, humility, and pulling stuff out of agreeableness. So in the HEXACO model, it's much easier to interpret agreeableness, disagreeableness as like a dominance submission kind of a thing. What do I mean by dominance and submission? There are people in the world who are more dominant. Maybe they like authority, having authority, kind of like the teacher Liam's talking about. And they like setting structures and boundaries and expect other people to act within those structures and boundaries, like your teacher, Liam. And Liam, it also sounds like you have a bit of a disagreeable trait because you were not going along with that. You were not being sort of agreeable to it, not being compliant, right? Not being tender-minded and thinking, oh, because the teacher wants to help me, right? You were not having it. And so you're rubbing up against each other. So these are the domains of honesty, sorry, of the HEXACO model. And I'm going to run through the facets more thoroughly than I did for the 5-factor because I think this is the better model. So under honesty, humility, you have sincerity. That's the straightforwardness that used to be under agreeableness in the big 5. So somebody who is more sincere, is more genuine. Somebody with a low score is more likely to be kind of manipulative, right? To flatter others, right? Pretend to like them to get a favor. Fairness is about avoiding self-interested fraud and corruption. Right? High scores wouldn't want to take advantage of other people or society at large. Desire for money and wealth comes up under greed avoidance. So some people who score score high on greed avoidance would not want to get that it bag with the LV all over it so that everyone can see that they could afford the status bag. But a low score on that kind of would. Maybe they'd want to be seen with the expensive car. The modesty scale is kind of a bit about narcissism. So somebody's low on modesty thinks they're better than other people and they're entitled to certain privileges that other people don't have. Okay, better than, they can kind of bend or break the rules because the rules are different for them. High scores would sort of see themselves as ordinary people that don't kind of deserve special treatment that other people also shouldn't receive. Emotionality under the HEXACO corresponds to neuroticism on the 5-factor model. And what do they got here? Fearfulness, anxiety, dependence, and sentimentality. So some people are more afraid of like injury, okay, and they want to avoid physical harm. And then other people are kind of more like the tough, brave type that would volunteer to go to war. Anxiety gets at the idea of like preoccupation and worry. So there's some people that do a lot of that, right? They're preoccupied even by like small problems. Their mind runs over them. Okay? And then low scorers just, they don't stress as much. Dependence is about your need for emotional support for others. Like, do you feel like you can just handle this, confidently handle this on your own, or do you need help with that? And sentimentality is about feeling bonds with others. So somebody who's not sentimental wouldn't like cry over saying goodbye. No, they don't need a Valentine's card. And then somebody who is high in sentimentality would have this very kind of empathetic sensitivity to the feelings of others. They would like feel other people's feelings. Extroversion is the E of the HEXACO. No, it's not. I'm wrong. It's the X of the HEXACO. Extroversion is the X. And under these, we have 4 subfactors. One of them is social self-esteem. Do you feel kind of confident enough about yourself that you think other people will like you and want to be your friend? So, like how they're seeing self-worth as an aspect of personality. So, somebody with low social self-esteem thinks they're kind of, worthless and unpopular. Social boldness is about your confidence in social situations. Can you sort of walk up to your crush and say, hey, would you like to go out for coffee? They might feel confident doing things like public speaking, right? Other people would feel very awkward by that. They might be afraid of public speaking. Okay, so high scorers, bold people, are willing to approach people and they're willing to speak up within group settings. I see that the HEXACO still has some aspect of dominance here because dominant people are obviously more comfortable in positions of leadership. They, might not, they're willing to do public speaking. Sociability is about gregariousness. Okay? People who are highly sociable like social interactions, right? They want to go to that party. They want to meet other people. And then low scorers prefer solitary activities. And when we generally talk about introversion and extroversion, we're often talking about sociability rather than these other subfactors. Something I do notice about extroverts is they seem to have like a lot of kind of spark that maybe seem vibrant. And, they might come off as sort of seeming dynamic, energetic. And whereas the low scorers, they seem a bit less like that. Maybe a bit, if duller is the right word. There is some kind of association between extroversion and dopamine. And high scorers on liveliness also have more of a positive outlook. Like they have more positive emotions. And the 5-factor model also loaded positive emotions onto extroversion. And all the unpleasant emotions, including anger in that case, were loaded onto neuroticism. So agreeableness under the HEXACO. But before I get to that, I see a comment. I'm a massive introvert, yet the amount of plays I was part of as a child, the amount of public speaking I needed to do was wild. So how did you deal with that, Noah? Like, did you Did you hate it, or did you learn to like it? These personality traits are predispositions. They don't have to determine what you do. And you can also see them as these traits as skills that you could develop. So you loved it when just in public with people I don't know can absolutely hate it. I didn't quite follow that. So you had mixed feelings about it. On to agreeableness. So the agreeableness domain of the HEXACO has the subfactors of forgivingness, gentleness, flexibility, and patience. One key difference between the HEXACO and the 5-factor model is the loading of anger. On the 5-factor model, anger loaded onto neuroticism because it's like a kind of unpleasant type emotion. And now it's loading onto agreeableness. Anger is the key emotion for dominance. People who are more dominant are quicker to anger. And so patience is your tendency to be calm rather than angry. Okay, so low scores have a shorter fuse. High scores will put up with a lot before they express any anger. Anger is socially constructed as appropriate for dominant people. Think about like the Old Testament. That God is a very angry God, but it's all righteous wrath, right? He was displeased, he was disobeyed, and that's why he has to go send plagues and such. Anger is often constructed as socially inappropriate for lower status people, where they are seen as kind of out of control or dangerous or irrational. So think about the ways that, I don't know, angry woman stereotypes and angry Black person stereotypes. People who are higher in agreeableness also tend to be higher in flexibility. But again, these are sub-factors, and you could be high on low and some on others. And those who are more flexible are more willing to compromise and cooperate with others. Compromise and cooperate also sounds like followership to me. It also sounds more submissive. Low scorers want their way. They're more willful and they're willing to argue, okay, and stand their ground. But those high in flexibility would accommodate other suggestions even when they're unreasonable. The subfactor of gentleness is about kind of being mild and lenient. So people who are high scorers don't want to judge people harshly. Judging is a dominant thing to do, right? The people that you get in trouble with who are higher up in the hierarchy are doing the judging. Okay, and people who are doing those judgments can be harsh. Some people are more willing to do that. Then there's forgivingness. And it's about your willingness to trust and like those who have harmed you. Okay, so high scorers are ready to trust others again, right? And to get back into the relationship after having been treated badly. People who have more submissive tendencies can be more open to exploitation and staying in relationships where they're being exploited. Whereas kind of low scorers do not like it when people cross their lines, and they remember that because they want to enforce boundaries and have people act with them. And if somebody's out of line, they want to back on line. There's some interesting correlations out there with agreeableness. Agreeable people are more likely to be dog people. A little bit more likely. This is not a strong effect. Disagreeable people are a bit more likely to be cat people. Now, cats are disagreeable, right? And if they don't like what you're doing, they're like, bleh. or not having it. They're not trying to please you. There are also kind of gender stereotypes around agreeableness and disagreeableness. Disagreeable traits seem more masculine, and they're seen as more like appropriate for men, right? It's more appropriate, socially appropriate for men to be sort of judgmental, right? And to set boundaries and to express anger. Those are all more dominant, disagreeable tendencies. Women are often socially expected to be, nice and to be patient and to not get angry and to be accepting and to be accommodating and to harmonize. The research that has been done so far, and there hasn't been a lot, does not find a gender difference in agreeableness. So there are many agreeable men out there, and you might kind of not quite fit your gender stereotype. And there are disagreeable women out there. I think, Judge Judy would be an example. But it's seen as kind of, I guess, maybe a bitchy type. Conscientiousness is a trait beloved by employers and teachers. Okay, it's about being this conscientiousness under the HEXACO is very similar to conscientiousness under the Big Five. So there's a tendency to be organized. Somebody who was low on organization might have like a messy room and a messy desk, and be double booking things and late for meetings. Diligence is about working hard, right? Having a strong work ethic. Right, getting the thing done, putting in the effort, whereas low scorers would have less of that motivation, more willing to maybe procrastinate and do something else or something different. Perfectionism is about detail orientation. So people who are high in perfectionism want to dot their I's and cross their T's, right? But those who are who are low in this trait would have maybe seem more sloppy, have more errors in their work. Prudence is about showing good judgment, thoughtful deliberation, okay, thinking about consequences, whereas those who are low prudence are more impulsive. Why do I have this here? Because I teach at St. Mary's University, where the motto is Age quod agis, which means do what you are doing. Do what you are doing. And the idea is, if you're going to do something, do it well, right? Do it to the best of your ability. Do it properly without sort of scattering your moral forces. So that Age quod agis is like an exhortation to conscientiousness. And these value judgments are coming through again. It sounds like it's better to be conscientious than to be low in conscientiousness. It sounds like impulsivity is bad, but is it? I mean, are there situations where you need to really act quickly and on instinct? Maybe there are. Like maybe being thoughtful and planned could be a liability in some situations. The last one is openness to experience. Okay. People who are high in openness to experience want to enjoy kind of beauty and art and nature. They're like, wow, what a beautiful view, right? They go to the art gallery. But the low scorers would be just kind of not interested in that, maybe more into more practical things. Inquisitiveness is about curiosity. Okay, there's a sort of an intellectualism thing here as well. Wanting to research things, wanting to learn and travel. That's an openness characteristic. Creativity is about innovation. Okay, original thought. Whether you're looking for, new solutions. Right, expressing yourself artistically. And again, we're seeing these value judgments. Low scores have little inclination for original thought. I mean, that just doesn't sound good. Here, meet my friend Bill. He has little inclination for original thought. Well, maybe Bill is, somebody that values tradition. Is there anything wrong with that? That could be adaptive too. There's a lot to be said for upholding traditions. Finally, there's the unconventionality scale. Some of you guys are weirdos. Some of you guys like weird things. And others among you think that weird people and things are creepy and don't like any of that. Okay, so some people who are higher in unconventionality are more eccentric and into odd and different things and find that interesting, whereas the low scores would feel uncomfortable with that, right? They might even dislike eccentric or non-conforming people. There's a question from Facian. Would you consider a person who has OCD to have a conscientious domain for perfectionism? Yeah, I would expect to see that. Now that's like taking it, that's an example. That's a good example, actually, because it shows how you can take any value trait just totally over the edge. I'm stopping myself now because I'm wondering if we're mixing up obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Somebody with obsessive compulsive personality disorder would come off as overly conscientious and way too rigid. OCD is actually an anxiety disorder where people do these little routines in order to reduce their anxiety. So, oh, I think I left the stove on. Got to go check. Okay, I didn't. I could have left the stove on. And they go check. So I think my answer is still yes, because it's still about trying to do everything the right way. Okay. I have not changed my response, though I have reconsidered it. And Liam says, I find most people are lower in that last one than they think. Do you mean unconventionality? Do you think more people are more conforming than they believe? Yeah, that's probably true. The HEXACO has that same issue with value judgments. Okay, it sounds like it's good to be high in agreeableness and bad to be low in agreeableness. It sounds like it's good to be high in openness and bad to be low in openness. But really, there is no state trait or behavior that is good or bad of itself. In some situation, given some goal, given some context, it is adaptive or maladaptive. Right? You make the judgment of whether a person is acting rightly or wrongly, also through some kind of a moral lens. Let's go with honesty, humility. That definitely sounds like you should have a lot of it. However, if you're a very honest, forthright person, you may have poor political skills. Like if you're trying to survive in a kind of cutthroat political environment, that could be used against you. Maybe your skill in lying could be an important survival tool. Being low in honesty, humility does also reflect, self-interest, but, heroes die young. There is adaptive value for self-interest. It helps you survive and reproduce. So I think if we're being good scientists, we would be critical of these value judgments. This is what your results might look like from the HEXACO. You might have gotten a table, you might have gotten a box plot. Basically, it compares your score to the median, which is the 50th percentile. And so what it's showing for me here is low agreeableness, because this is my score. This box shows a range. I think it goes from the 10th percentile to the 90th percentile. And the median is the 50th percentile. So you can see that I'm less agreeable than like the lowest tenth of the population. That's pretty low. But what's average? Now, organization. Okay, that's close to the median. So that's how you read your scores. I'm looking at the time, and I've got about 10 minutes left. So what I think I'll do is I'm going to keep, because I'm recording, I'm going to keep going, and leave at 12:20 if you have to, and watch the rest on your own time. Because of this problem with value judgments and making people feel bad about their scores, the most popular personality test that you find used in all kinds of workplaces is the MBTI. And your textbook has been clear that the MBTI has poor reliability and questionable validity. I think that it's valid to the extent that it actually reflects the HEXACO dimensions. So it has an introversion extroversion factor, and that corresponds to the HEXACO. I think that the perceiving versus judging corresponds to conscientiousness. However, it's a sloppy test, and people who take the test different times get typed differently based on, because they respond to the question different ways, because they're not very good questions. I think that honestly, with the MBTI, your better bet, if you understand the dimensions theoretically, is to type yourself according to what you know about yourself and those dimensions, rather than to rely on the test. So, like, if you try to understand judgers versus perceivers, the perceivers tend to, oops, sorry, my screen got taken over. There we go. Okay. So you can think about which one you are, and you might do a better job typing yourself than the test does. That said, another problem this test has is it forces you into being kind of one thing or the other, being an introvert or an extrovert. And that's misleading and probably inaccurate because, as you know, many traits are, if not most, are normally distributed. Most people are ambiverts, not true introverts or extroverts. You can see other parallels as well. When I see thinkers versus feelers, I think agreeableness versus disagreeableness. I see openness here and sensors versus intuitives. But low openness comes off better as sensor. Realistic people who focused on details, right, have common sense and past experience. That's like tradition. Practical solutions to problems, right? That's much, it's more strengths-based. And so the test says that there's 16 personalities based on the combinations. And it gives you a report. This was mine, not based on my scores, because I don't think the test is very good, but based on my understanding of the domains and my HEXACO scores. And what's really key is that, well, most people will kind of agree with their reports. And that could be a Barnum statement effect, because the reports do make a lot of kind of vague claims that you could agree with. People often don't check other reports to see if they would compare better. That said, I thought that this was a kind of pretty reasonable reflection of me. Again, it's not the type that I'd get from taking the test, which was ESTJ, right? Quite different. So this is popular in the workplace, and an application is, let's say everyone gets their report. It's easy to share reports and then think about how different personality traits contribute to a team in important ways. Imagine if you did this with the Big Five, and it's like, oh, Bill is low in conscientiousness and low in openness. Well, that doesn't sound good, does it? Now, and the boss is low in honesty and humility. I once used the 5-factor test with a client, and his scores looked really bad, and it was embarrassing, and that was the last time he ever saw me. So I remember thinking after that, damn, I wish I used the MBTI. So even though psychologists love to hate the MBTI. Another way you could look at personality is as interests. You're interested in doing certain things. You enjoy doing certain things. And that could lead you to a place of vocation. Maybe there's some people who like doing creative things and they're the artists of the world. Maybe there's some people that like doing more practical things. You know, maybe they'd like to get under the hood of a car, and those are more kind of realistic personality types. I mean, there's some people who like organizing things. They're the conventional types. And there's an interesting intersection here between personality, psychology, and sociology and career, because career is about the way you show up in society through your social roles and what you do. And it should, to some extent, reflect your disposition and your interests. So this is a personality type theory. It sort of says there's 6 different types. You know, you could be an artist, you could be maybe an enterprising person like a leader, or maybe you're more of a helper type. And these have some correspondence back to the HEXACO. So I'm thinking that this sounds a little bit like low openness. And I know this sounds a bit like conscientiousness. This has a bit of extroversion on it. There are real correlations that are significant, but they're lower than you would think. They're about 0.3, so there is a lot of overlap. The test asks you what you would like doing. That's about an interest, not whether you're good at it. That's a skill. That's different. And if we take your top 3, so I think I got social or investigative, it was an SAI, that's a code. You can actually plug that in to databases of jobs that have been devised by IO psychologists or people doing similar work. Right, all the jobs have been coded according to interests. So you can plug in your code and it would come up with a list of jobs that could be suitable for you. And when I look down my list here, it's organized by how much education you need. 4 is like basically an undergraduate degree, and I think 5 is a graduate degree. These are all the things I've done, right? Like I taught statistics. I've done sort of counseling. I'm currently working as a post-secondary psychology teacher. So this is a pretty good test, though I also see people getting results that are way off for them, right? It's a tool, not a crystal ball. And, you know, it can mistype you as well. On to values. There is a universal framework of human values that was devised by Schwartz. I highlighted Shalom because I made a mistake and said Solomon somewhere else. It's actually Shalom. That's like a more Hebrew version of the name. He's actually a rabbi, a social psychologist, and he came up with a framework of universal human values. So what's a value? Well, it's something that you want, that you have an emotion about. You're happy when you get this value. You're angry or afraid when it's threatened. And it's deeply connected to motivation. Right? The things you want to do reflect your values. And values are transcendent. They're kind of bigger. If you value justice, that's bigger than any particular situation. We all, either as individuals or groups, have different hierarchies of values. The handout that I sent you describes some of those different values and places them on a map. Right? Some of the values conflict with each other. So I think the map shows you that security is basically opposite from self-determination. There's a lot to say for living a life that's true to your values, in a way that's true to your values, for your well-being. People are often not happy when they're not living according to their values. And so one way to get through life is to make choices from circumstance to circumstance that align with your values. And so you don't really know what the destination is or where you're going, but if you keep choosing according to your values, you might be satisfied with where the path takes you. So these are the values from Schwartz's values framework. There is, I don't know, about 57 of them, and they're grouped into 10 categories. And so some of them are like maybe about conservation. Some people want safety and security and conformity. These are almost more like kind of right-wing values. And then some of them are more kind of like left-wing values, like being open to change, trying to make things, doing things differently to try to make the world better. Universalism is a very kind of left-wing value. So it's about, trying to make a better world for everyone. Benevolence is different from universalism because it's about being good to your in-group members. Okay, so being good to your friends and being good to your community and helping them. Whereas universalism would be about everyone. These values are placed in a kind of circular wheel because some of them conflict with each other and some of them are close to each other. So somebody who's more self-directed and into freedom also might like adventure. And you can see how that conflicts with conformity and with safety. Okay, universalism is in contrast with power. I sent you a test that will measure your values. You can see it'll give you scores. It's important to remember that when considering this framework, that it's best not to think of the values themselves as good or bad. Try to have a value neutral framework to the values, because to some extent, everyone wants some power. Even like the most left-wing people want empowerment. Even the most adventurous of us want to have some safety. You don't want to die bungee jumping. So all of these values have their place in the world. However, you have a hierarchy and you have a tendency to think that your values are the best. And if you had power, you would probably enforce your values. If you have a value, you may or may not act on it. But imagine if you could act on it skillfully, habitually, and so well that it actually makes the world a bit of a better place, like for you and for other people. That is when you get a virtue. And the virtues have been organized into the Character Strengths and Virtues Handbook. It's like the Handbook of Positive Psychology. The Handbook of Clinical Psychology is the DSM-5. It's about the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders. It's about how people are kind of wrong and broken and mentally ill and sick and disordered. Well, this is kind of about how people are right and strong and well, which is a nice change. And it groups 24 character strengths into 6 main virtues. And so if you value, let's say, knowledge and learning, well, maybe you'd be a wise person, and that would be appreciated. If you really value fairness, you have a virtue of justice. It has its limitations, like it claims to be universal and cross-cultural, but again, it was written by like white Western men, and it does, I think, the book betray that perspective sometimes. It also reifies certain behaviors as positive with any kind of context, and that troubles me a bit. There is an official test for this that is the VIA Character Strengths test, because that's proprietary and you need to pay for it. I sent you a free version that changes the names of some of these 24 things, because maybe those terms are copyright, but it'll give you your scores on these different traits. And thank you for your patience. 4 minutes overtime. Any thoughts, questions about this?